Hello, Internet friends. Today we are going to be talking about how to shop for external storage for your audio projects, particularly if you use a lot of samples, maybe orchestral samples that need um, lots of random access calling to, legato transitions and things. But it also will be helpful to just audio people who are trying to shop for drives, figure out what is better, what kind of things you should shop for. I'm not going to recommend too many specific products. I'll recommend a couple things that I've purchased so that you get an idea, but I want to show you how to shop for and think through the decisions that lead to those purchases. And what we're going to start with is the SATA connector or SATA connector. It's a um, both a protocol and a connection type, of physical connection type that was developed for spinning disks, and it will work fine for a lot of audio, especially SATA 3 at 600 megabytes per second. And the theoretical maximum is always going to be higher than your actual throughput, but this was used for plenty of audio projects with multiple tracks playing back from computers for many years. We're here at the end of 2023 now, and the shopping season is in full swing, and people are, what do I buy? That speed is going to be fast enough for a lot of audio things. But if you want to be future proof, you tend to start looking at SSDs. They're also smaller, lighter. They tend to fail uh, less often. They don't have moving parts. You can have an SSD on a SATA connector. That's actually going to be this type of picture up here. And you can get the less expensive versions, I argue, but I'm going to get to that later. Let's just go through the connection types first, um, the interface types. The NVMe standard was developed after SATA specifically for SSDs because the solid state drives that didn't have mechanical moving parts are faster in general. They generally go up to 7,500 megabytes per second now in the Gen 4 interface. They use a channel called PCIe, which that you used to always plug them into your internal drives. But and I'm going to say something kind of at the end here about alternatives to all of these external things that may surprise you. So there's my little YouTube plug to keep watching or skip to the end. But they now can work in um, external enclosures. Like this one is one that I use. So you could just drop this into this thing, toolless install, but it's going to bottleneck the speed. And I'm going to get there in a second. So let's talk about USB for a second. USB, how fast is that? Well, you'll notice that USB 2 got up to about 480 megabits. Notice the lowercase b here. And USB 3.1 got up to 10 gigabits. A byte is 8 bits, so the math isn't a 10-based math. So just be careful when you start seeing things like mega capital B. These are 3,000 megabytes, and this is 10,000 megabytes, approximately. It gets a little confusing here, but the main thing that I want to point your attention to is that the newer standards, 3.1, 3.2, and USB 4, are up to 40 gigabits, 20 gigabits, and super speed is 10 gigabits. Those are probably where you're going to be shopping for most of the time if you're trying to buy new things. And so the question then comes up, especially for Mac users, what is Thunderbolt? How does Thunderbolt fit into all of this? It's not the easiest thing to explain. It is compatible with all of the USB 4 stuff. It has this little, it's funny, it's called Thunderbolt, and thunder is a sound, but it's a lightning bolt. icon. And it can oh no, we've got a call coming in. The idea with Thunderbolt is that it's very similar to this USB 4 and well, there's a Thunderbolt 3 and a Thunderbolt 4. Thunderbolt 4 is basically this 40 gigabits per second speed that you're looking at. When you're looking at just USB, you want to look for this super speed. I didn't have any cable pictures prepared, but it's going to have the number 10 or the number 20 on both the enclosure and the cable. So you can have a enclosure that can go faster than the cable you're using to connect it. And you can have the thing on your computer that you're plugging it into, the USB-C, looking plug that you're plugging it into on your computer or your hub, go slower than the cable and the enclosure. So you need to think about all the different places where that fast drive could be bottlenecked. It's going to be a fast drive into an enclosure, if using an external enclosure, into the cable, into your computer, and all three of those connecting points can potentially bottleneck the speed if you're really concerned about the speed. I'm also going to show why you probably don't need to be concerned about speed by the end of the video, but it's nice to be future-proof. This is more of a slide if you're just completely bewildered about connector types, that you can come back and reference what USB-C looks like, the difference, for instance, between a mini USB and a micro USB, which is that little, it's kind of got these, it's asymmetrical. So it has a longer flat bottom and then a narrower top. I call this the bottom and this the top. And then there's a different micro B connector type that has that little wedge in the middle. And USB-C is symmetrical, so you can flip it over and it'll continue working both directions. Micro USB did not. You could not flip it over. It only goes in one direction. All right, this is the picture that tries to start describing the difference between USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4. Basically, Thunderbolt supports everything USB does and has a couple extra things that especially Apple users will benefit from. I think that's the best way to summarize it. It does connect in the same way USB-C connector types will connect. Now, there's going to be this thing that'll come up called QLC versus MLC, or when we're talking about Samsung, I think it's QVO versus whatever the thing that isn't QVO is. And my recommendation here is just buy the cheaper one for sample playback, because the more expensive one is, no matter what letters they use for it, is going to be for faster write times. In other words, you're writing to the disk. And when you're reading samples or pulling samples into RAM, you probably don't need to write a lot. So you don't probably need to write super fast. Plus, if you're buying a cheap enclosure like I do, you're going to bottleneck the speed of the SSD before you even hit the theoretical maximum. So there's just no point in buying the more expensive MLC or whatever Samsung calls it. Just buy the cheaper QLC, the ones that can read just fine. And, this starts getting targeted too at NAS and server people or people working with video. If you are working with video, maybe your choices are going to be a little different, but working with audio is on a different scale entirely. Let's talk about M2. A drive can actually be SATA and M2 and not be NVMe. SATA corresponds to NVMe in the way that they are both connector, interface, protocol, communication standards. M2 is more of a form factor. M2 corresponds to the physical size and shape of the drive. It's distinguished from the form factor of a 2.5-inch rectangle drive, a bigger drive shape and size. Most of your enclosures will also help you with a guide on the keys. The keys are these little nubs at the end of the drive. And it gets confusing. Sometimes there's a B and M key. Sometimes there's only a B key. Sometimes there's only an M key. NVMe and SATA are confusing. The numbers across the top, the 2280 and stuff, are the length in millimeters. So they correspond to different lengths or sizes of SSDs. The ones that look like this with one little notch are the only ones that I tend to buy. So I don't know if that helps you. And when you get them the first time, you'll notice they're really small. I mean, they're smaller than a pack of gum. Um, they might be a little longer than a pack of gum, but they're super light, super thin. It feels like, wow, all that storage in this tiny little thing. Let's go on to which enclosure do I get? So I have a 3 of these. You'll notice down here, that's the SS10. This is actually going to bottleneck whatever drive I get at the 10 gigabits per second speed. The cable also goes 10 gigabits per second, which means I get 8 to 900 or 8 to 9,000 megabytes per second. What I do with my laptop is I get some 3M plastic Velcro-y things, and I just tape these to the back. I buy longer cables, and I just open the lid of my laptop, and they just sit in the back of my laptop. It's kind of a little trick that I do, and it's 3M adhesive, so it pulls right off the laptop. You'll notice this is just the SS Super Speed 10. That's plenty fast for all of my sample and audio needs. And if you want a dual enclosure, you can get a Thunderbolt one. They get a lot more expensive, a lot quicker. Notice this is only $30, not super on sale. It's generally $30. Sometimes it's a little cheaper. And there's lots of variations, but this one has lots of high ratings on Amazon, and I tend to use it. Whereas this one is already 2 for $149. But, you know, and it does require external power, which is kind of frustrating. And the controllers inside, the controllers are, the little chips that are basically translating between the drive itself, which fits in here, and the connector for the USB connector for the cable. These are the less expensive ones, which is why they are so slow. They're USB Super Speed 10. This is Thunderbolt 3, which is a huge jump in performance increase. Well, it's a big jump, but that's what you're kind of paying for here. And you need a power supply, and they give you a nice rubber thing in case you drop it, and it's metal aluminum, and it's a really nice thing, but the price jump is pretty high. You get 1500 megabytes per second throughput, but that's for both drives. Notice it says single disk speed. So if you were only using one, you could go theoretical maximum 1500. But because you're using two, it's going to be pulling each of these, which is only going to be around 750 each, theoretical maximum. Which means, well, why didn't I just go back to just like an old SATA 3, and just buy an 8 terabyte for 500 today? It's almost the same speed there. It's going to be limited to what, 600 megabytes per second, I think? 560 megabytes. So sequential reads, but that is sequential. We're going to talk about sequential and random pretty soon here. But there is that thought, if you're going to spend 150 here and another 400 or so on 8 terabytes of drive space, assuming that's as high as you go, then why would you get all those super fast hard drives if one of these is basically almost as good as this dual? I mean, we're kind of getting into diminishing returns in cost at about that point. So let's keep moving on. I could just get an even cheaper old spinning hard drive. It's 7,200 RPM. It's at a 6 gigabits per second. It's even got its own 128 megabyte cache. Well, I need to figure out an external enclosure for that, probably, maybe, depending on what I'm using. But it is an option. You could just get 8 terabytes this way, too. I tend to use these for backup more than anything else, more than reading these days, but it is still an option because a lot of your audio is actually going to be processed in RAM if you've got enough RAM. Now, this article is from Sound on Sound in 2009, just to give you an idea of the math of what is fast enough. And in 2099, using 96 kilohertz audio, which most of us aren't using yet. Most of us are still using 44.1 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz. They were doing 24-bit. You should be doing 24-bit. If you could do 32 float-bit, but you should be doing 24-bit audio, and at least I do 2448. Maybe you're still working in 44.1, but you probably don't want 16 to do all of your recording and engineering in 16-bit. You probably want to do 24-bit. That's the bit depth, that's the dynamic range, that's how loud and quiet things get. And the 41, 48, 96 is how fast, how many samples per second there are. But they were playing 255 off this old SSD from 2009 with no problem. 32 tracks, so 255 tracks of audio is sequential audio, theoretically. Assuming your drive was clean when you wrote it, you're probably reading mostly sequential bits because it tried to find big sectors on the disk to write these long audio files to, 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute audio files to. And it's trying to read them back, probably, hopefully, sequentially if your disk was clean and you're, well maintained. 32 tracks here they did of heavily edited audio. Now that gets more random, meaning maybe one edit was saved to one part of the disk, another edit was saved to another part of the disk. And so this is where drives talk about random access versus sequential access. You're pulling a little bit into RAM to send to your audio processing, the computer, and playback, versus pulling it from random places on the disk, which is what samples use. If you've got a legato transition, it's going to be saved over there. And then, the sustain part of the sample, and then all this other ones. Random access is going to be more kind of, the I/O, the in-out operation on the disk is going to be much more volatile, I guess. And so you need to be looking at random access speeds if you're doing an instrument playback versus sequential access. But they were able to get 255 tracks of 2496 to play back at no problem with these speeds of, oh wow, way down at only 83.5 megabytes per second. So what we're talking about here is really overkill to some extent. All these speeds we've been talking about are so much faster than that, right? Old USB could do that. Thunderbolt can do it. All these other, things that we've been talking about are so much faster than that. They're 10 gigabits per second. So, so just keep that in mind. As you get a lot of voices, you're playing more than 32 tracks. You're playing maybe more than 255 tracks. If you've got a piano sample, if you've got an orchestral sample, you've got a ton of them, all those different voices reading simultaneously and playing and trying to overlap in your channels is going to be even more than this, but there's so much distance between 83 megabytes per second, which was the fastest it was, this drive was in 2009, and today's, hundreds or thousands of megabytes per second. So you can do the math on what you're trying to do if you can. But then I encourage you to look at something like this. This is just a post, so I don't, it could be slightly wrong. It's just something I found on Mac Rumors forum about your internal drive. You may not want an external drive. So this is the big reveal at the end of the video. You may not want an external drive at all. You may just want to use your internal drive. And if you do, it might be faster than all of that. It might be 6,000 megabytes per second or 6 gigabits per second. So it's actually hard to find the speeds of your internal drives on a Mac. They just don't advertise them, which is why I found it on a forum. They say how much storage you get, 1 terabyte, 512 gigabytes, 2 terabyte, 4. They tell you how much storage, and then they immediately go to the RAM and the RAM speed. But they're kind of concealing, for whatever reason, the variations on the speeds of the drive. I don't know why they don't advertise it. It's just not a big deal to them, I guess. Or it doesn't feel like a selling point sometimes, but in some cases it is. If you've got a MacBook Pro, even an Intel MacBook Pro, and it's got an SSD, it may be at around this 3,000 megabyte per second speed. So just keep that in mind. The problem is Mac internal drives are very expensive and they are very fast. If you're building your own PC, you probably knew a lot of this stuff already. If you're buying a PC, it might be more obvious what speed that it might be more advertised what speed that internal hard drive is going to be. But maybe you don't want an external drive for a lot of the stuff you're using a lot of the time. And yet, let's go back to the elephant in the room is, do you care about your drive speeds if you've got a lot of RAM? Because drive speeds do not make your RAM faster. RAM is so much faster than all of the things we've been talking about. RAM, a PC3 1280 memory module can transfer at 12,800 megabytes per second, which is faster than all of the drives we've discussed this year, available this year here, the end of 2023. And you might want to just fill up your RAM with as much of the sample stuff that you can so that it can serve as much as it can and save your drives for the little bit of audio playback that you need anyway. Um, you'll notice slight differences with some of the load times into Contact or whatever your sample player is. Maybe, I guess. Maybe you won't. I mean, this video isn't really about what you'll notice. It's just how to shop. So I just want to educate you that to the idea that the reason people say get as much RAM as you can afford is because it's really what is driving your should be probably what is driving the sample playing. And if you want, the reason that you want it is because that's where you want your speed. So just keep that in mind. And I hope that this was helpful. If I said anything incorrect, if I made a bobble and I said bits instead of bytes, or I said it said connector and interface or protocol in the wrong way, I apologize, because I was just trying to go through this really quickly, and I've posted a lot of these summaries in forums and chats. People keep asking the same question, so I finally just wanted to make a video, kind of spew all of this stuff out. And good luck shopping. I hope that you buy something that makes you happy. I guess the very last thing that I will say is that I have gotten much less brand sensitive. People will say, which one should I buy? Is Samsung reliable? Is Crucial reliable? And then, all of these other off brands. I've started to buy many more brands, having read a bunch of articles, because there are plenty of brands who make very high quality SSDs that are cheaper. I've got one from Team Group, and Team Group. I mean, you probably haven't heard of Team Group if you're still watching. Enclosures and drives in one. Those are fine. I tend to find them, um, they're not my favorite, but they might be your favorite. And someone might recommend them and make it so much easier. It's all in one. Okay, go for it. Just if you just want the more convenient solution and you don't want to do all of this piecemeal shopping and everything, I choose some more flexibility. I like being able to swap things in and out if I need to. If something fails, I can quickly swap something in and out of something else. Always keep a backup. But if you want something that's all enclosed and it's all sealed, you can get something like those, portable. It's designed to be portable types of things. Yeah. All right. That's it. Good luck. Have fun. Happy shopping. Cheers.